Welcome to DeProgram. I'm Michelle Witte. I'm here with Ted Rall. We're missing our boy John Kiriakou, but he will be back. But there was there's been so much to talk about this week. We're going to talk about a few things. The painful RFK Jr. confirmation hearings that are in their second day today. I watched more of those hearings than I think I have of any other. I watched most of them yesterday. It's not a fun process. I don't feel very enlightened by it. It might have been I was sort of watching and then doing other stuff, but I don't know what I could possibly predict about his eventual confirmation or not. As a result, it does seem like more grandstanding than attempts at enlightenment. I don't know that I'm surprised by that, but I guess I can remain disappointed. We've also got plans by the Trump administration to perhaps house migrants at Guantanamo Bay, not where the Al-Qaeda guys are languishing, I guess, in some other facility that, as I understand, would need quite a lot of investment to make it functional, which is, leapfrogging over the question of whether this should be done, to which the answer is definitely not. But yeah, not a good development. And we also have, and this is the one that's been affecting me the most personally, is this wild ride with regard to federal grant funding and program funding. If we had been talking about this yesterday morning, we'd have had a completely different discussion than we are going to have today when this Office of Management and Budget memo that put a pause on all of that funding has now been rescinded. So that's what we're going to get to. And then we're going to talk about DeepSeek. DeepSeek launching a reasoning model that caused NVIDIA, the chip maker, to lose 17% of its market valuation, the biggest drop in a company's history. And it's a very interesting story, not only technologically and in terms of geopolitical rivalries, but also, you guys are going to have to forgive me, but I think it speaks a lot to the results in an economy of monopolization. And I think that what we are seeing here potentially in this disruption by DeepSeek is related to what we have seen in LA with the wildfires there burning out of control, what we saw in East Palestine, almost 2 years ago now, with that terrible railroad derailment, what we've seen in the music industry with the whole Free Britney movement, and what we're seeing in American healthcare and the execution of CEO Brian Thompson in the street in New York. So I found a bunch of data that I thought was really interesting to pull these all together to show, how monopolization, it actively hurts us as a society. And this might be one more manifestation of that, which I find to be fascinating. But where do you want to start, Ted? Do you want to start with Guantanamo? You want to start with RFK?
Why don't we do RFK? I was traveling yesterday, so I didn't get a chance to watch the hearings, and I'm anxious to hear what you thought. I was just full transparency. I think of all of Trump's nominees, he's the only one that I really want to see nominated, because I really care about the big food, the war on big food that he might be able to initiate. So I don't know. I'm kind of on tenterhooks as to whether he's going to get to hold that job.
I think you're a little more RFK friendly than I am, but I do, to the degree that he is going to focus on, his big promise is he wants to focus on chronic disease. He wants to focus on things like obesity, childhood obesity, diabetes, that kind of stuff. Taking on big food, I think that would all be really great. I have some questions about other stuff, but I don't know. It seems I'm not going to tell you anything that's going to be incredibly surprising. It seemed very partisan. There were protesters in the crowd. Mostly the thing that people are upset about is RFK's real or perceived anti-vax stance.
Mhm.
He himself says over and over, and he said over and over in the confirmations, I'm not anti-vaccine. My children are vaccinated. I believe in the childhood protocol, the childhood vaccine protocol, et cetera, et cetera. Now, at one point he said, the first page of my book, whatever book he's referencing, says I am not anti-vaccine, and the last page says I am not anti-vaccine. Whatever, people can say a lot of things. Your actions speak louder than words. He got a lot of criticism for, a story was brought up about a measles outbreak in, I think, American Samoa.
That's right.
Yeah. Where, there's one story that says RFK Jr. went there after there had been a terrible accident with the administration of two vaccines, measles vaccines to children. These two kids died. It was, the nurses who were part of that were charged with manslaughter. Like, it was a terrible mistake. There were then measles outbreaks that RFK Jr. gets blamed for because he went there and was talking about problems with vaccines. He claims that timeline is off. But it was just, the confirmation hearing was a lot of posturing, a lot of yes and no questions, give me a yes and no answer, sort of badgering that's not very, I understand that these senators only have very short amounts of time. But, just doing these gotcha yes or no things over and over didn't particularly feel enlightening to me. I'm guessing, I don't know anything about Republicans who might not vote for RFK. It does seem like he can peel away. There are some Democratic votes that he is going to get. It might still come down to a J.D. Vance tiebreaker, a la Pete Hegseth. But it seems like if that does happen, it's not going to be strictly on partisan lines, is the impression that I'm getting so far.
Interesting. Yeah, we live in a world where, Marco Rubio sailed through 99 to 0. You would think that there might be a little pushback there, given his politics on foreign affairs in particular.
Yeah.
But you'd be mistaken. Our RFK, we'll see what happens. Obviously he's he's one of the, I don't know, do you think I think he's the most controversial Trump nominee, right? Even more so than Gabbard.
Maybe. I was going to say it's going to be a toss-up. It's going to be a toss-up between him and Gabbard. Checking to see I'm not muted. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I could quantify the controversy between the two of them. I think Hegseth should have been the most controversial, but he has squeaked through, as we saw. Yeah, there was also a lot in the confirmation hearing, a lot of, this is Donald Trump's position. What do you think about this? Are you going to implement Donald Trump's policies? And something that, RFK continued to refer back to is, Donald Trump and I have talked about this and we share this vision and this is what we plan to do. And there sort of seemed to be like a sort of, how dare you sit up here and say that you're going to implement the policy directions and priorities of Donald Trump? It's like, what's the man gonna say? That's
right.
That's the guy who's elected. It's his cabinet member. He's a political appointee. That's the whole thing, It
would be strange if he
didn't.
I do.
Yeah, he'd probably have his nomination withdrawn if he said, no, I'm going to actively subvert the will of this guy. It's sort of, that's again, like they're still trying to make, proximity to Donald Trump or agreeing with Donald Trump somehow toxic. And it feels sort of pointless and silly. One thing that I found dismaying, I will say, and that I want to talk about a little bit more in the future, is there was a lot of attention paid to mifepristone, which is a part of a medical abortion. Like mifepristone, and in combination with another drug, is used in like 40% of abortions in the United States now, I think, something like that. A lot of them.
All abortions.
Of all abortions, right. It is what is used to provide a medication abortion. It's used early on in pregnancy. And there was a case in Texas that was brought before a wacko anti-abortion Texas judge, that was brought by a group of anti-abortion doctors that was challenging both the FDA's initial approval of mifepristone, but also a recent update to that approval that allowed it to be used later in a pregnancy. So going from like 7 weeks to 10 weeks. I forget now off the top of my head exactly what that cutoff was, but it pushed it further back, said, yeah, it's safe to use it later on. And they were trying to suggest that, the case was trying to suggest that mifepristone was an unsafe drug and that it shouldn't be given to women. The case was tossed out by the Supreme Court eventually, who found that the plaintiffs did not have standing because they could not find a woman who had taken mifepristone and had a problem with it to come and join their cause, nor could they find, if I remember correctly, they couldn't find anyone who was involved in using mifepristone at all to join their lawsuit trying to get it shut down. And the Supreme Court correctly said, what are you doing? And now this judge in Texas, so the plaintiff group is a sort of anti-abortion doctors group. Then the attorneys general of a couple of southern states joined into the lawsuit. And now, somewhat irregularly, it would seem, but I am not a lawyer, the original Texas judge is allowing those three attorneys general to revive the case. And some might say, well, because the original case that you joined in, those plaintiffs were found to not have standing, there's not a legitimate case to revive. So this is going to be a whole new legal question. But there were quite a few senators up there who wanted to talk to RFK about mifepristone and about, because he is someone who is, well, I'm not going to say sympathetic. His anti-vaxness comes from questioning the safety of not all vaccines across the board, but some vaccines, including some very common vaccines. And so he's a soft target, I think, for, maybe this drug isn't safe either. Well, maybe this drug isn't safe either. And so it was dismaying to see a lot of attention paid to mifepristone in this hearing. And RFK Jr. not dismissive of that, saying, no, this is not a drug that I intend to take on. He would, because he needs those Republicans to confirm him. You know what I mean? So, and RFK Jr. is not anti-abortion. Donald Trump's not anti-abortion. So it will be interesting to see how these guys end up walking a line there. But, it's going to make life worse for women in this country if medication abortions are less available.
Well, especially since medical abortions are less available ever since the Dobbs decision, and even before the Dobbs decision, particularly in southern states, where effectively abortion had been unavailable in places like Alabama, Texas, for hundreds and hundreds of miles, where it effectively you'd have to leave the state and go far away, get on a plane in many cases, and have some abortion tourism. So for
surgical abortions, you mean? Yeah.
Right,
when you have things like your hallway has to be wide enough to accommodate 2 stretchers at a time, or we have to have hospital admitting privileges, all of this stuff. Yeah.
And a lot of So these chemical pharmaceutical abortions were viewed as this is what we're going to do next, right? Then there was the war, the Comstock Act, right? Like the war on attempts to use the mails to disseminate and distribute these medications to women, pregnant women, in places where they could not otherwise obtain an abortion in a timely manner. And then, of course, there's the case concerning, I don't know where that stands right now, the Texas women who claimed that they nearly died as a result of that state statute. So, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because this is such an important issue, and yet in the last election, what we learned was that it's not a top-ranking issue. It's an issue that people have strong opinions about, but they don't necessarily vote by.
At the national level, and I think that is partly the fault of Democrats, who have not been able to do very much on the national level. And so when Trump was like, well, we'll kick it back to this, with Dobbs, it was kicked back to the states. We have seen mobilization at the state level.
Yes.
I mean, I think people kind of correctly thought, you haven't demonstrated to me that you're going to do anything at the national level to codify this into law. So it was left as a court decision, able to be turned over. So yeah, it is a very galvanizing issue. But I think it has been demonstrated that the place right now where you can have actual control over it is at the state level. And if this is what helps wrest control of state legislatures away from Republicans, then great. I feel sorry
but I don't think it will. I mean, look at what happened. There was such an unintended consequence with the mobilization of pro-choice movements in places like Ohio, where they got ballot initiatives through in red states, in a number of red states. I think Kentucky was one of them. And so what seems to have happened is there's been some ideological ticket splitting, where some people who are pro-choice they felt good about voting Republican or okay about voting Republican because they can vote to codify abortion rights in a ballot initiative.
Yeah. I mean, so we'll see. Like, it's a mess, basically. And the other thing, mess. They use like tricky language. I think I heard somebody in the confirmation here, they were talking about mifepristone and saying something like, doesn't even have to be prescribed by a doctor. And hey, if you think you're seeing a doctor every time you go to the doctor and not a nurse practitioner, or, all of this other shit, like, it's this sort of trickery. We're saying, like, they're letting these pills be handed out like candy because they don't have to be prescribed by a doctor. Or they're like performing, you're doing surgical abortions in closets because you're not in an actual 5-story, multi-suite hospital building. It's really dark. And so that, like, to the extent that RFK is going to have to pander to conservative Republican interests, their medical hangups are not ones that I really want to see, embodied and enacted in the United States. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know. The same thing is going on today. I keep hearing it. I also sort of feel like I wish these senators would get together and decide which ones are going to talk about which topic, because you keep hearing them bring up and explain the same story. And you're like, what? I heard that. And I heard his response to it. Can you ask him a different question? I know you want to, like, get your soundbite about Samoa as well, but, like,
yeah, it's not even a rope. It's not even a rope-a-dope, right? It tends to be just redundant.
Yeah. The other fiasco that has been very personal for me this week is this government funding freeze. Oh, wait, we're going to undo a little bit of it. Fuck it. We'll just start over. Because I have friends, I have friends who work at medical institutions that were affected by this purchasing freeze, who are calling me in a panic. Like,
do you want to sort of walk us through exactly what happened, or basically the rough description?
As I understand it, and I was trying this morning to go back and look at the executive order, but Donald Trump, when he came in, issued this among a bunch of other executive orders, an executive order to stop funding, Marxism, social engineering via the Green New Deal, and woke ideology, gender ideology, and issued, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Ted, but issued an executive order that said, we're going to look at all of our government spending and we're going to cut out that stuff.
Yeah, 90-day freeze, a 90-day pause for checks that would normally be going out, but we're going to wait. We're going to take a look at everything, make sure that not one penny goes out that doesn't comply with this executive order.
Yeah. Okay. So then the Office of Management and Budget issues a memo, like, directing that, right? I mean, so I'm like, because the executive order, like, lots of presidents, I feel like, come in and then they ask agencies to write up reports on what's going on so they can see if they want to continue funding it or not, because they're going to have different priorities. And that in itself is not, like, a novel thing. I don't remember the language of the original executive order at all, but so the Office of Management and Budget puts a stop to everything all of a sudden, and I think people maybe don't understand how much the federal government funds
It's
in
a
terms
major
of,
part of the US economy.
yeah. And so you have, like I said, people at federally funded healthcare institutions who have patients who are admitted to the hospital for long awaited procedures for which a few last things need to be purchased, who are then like literally could be sitting in a hospital bed waiting for a life-saving experimental procedure to happen that is suddenly put on pause. At the same time, you have maybe academics at research institutions who are not getting paid by the institutions where they work, or not entirely, but are getting paid through grant money from the federal government to do research that takes a really long time and involves living things that need to be fed. If you have a bunch of cells that you've worked 5 years to create that are going to sit and wither and die in a refrigerator while somebody at OMB scratches his ass and tries to decide if your project is Marxist or not, like this sets back research years, And so I personally had people call, in a panic, right? And maybe I am too optimistic, but I did keep saying, like, this is clearly a shock and awe campaign. And as much as I think this administration has bad priorities, I don't think anyone really wants to set back American research a decade and just hand all this to China or whoever our geopolitical rival is, right? I mean, I don't give a go China, whatever. The person who does it best does it best. I don't really care. But that would be the effect of it, of like having this pause, because there's a lot of things that you can't write after a 90-day pause.
Well, Michelle, what do you think happened here? I mean, do you think there's a failure of people like Elon Musk and his Department of Governmental Efficiency, so-called government department, or and other top Trump administration officials to really think it through and understand what how dramatic some of the unintended repercussions would be?
I think I was like, this is a stupid blunt instrument. And they immediately got pushback from the VA, because like VA approved loans aren't going to go through, or you're going to have, like you were not going to approve the loans for homes for veterans, services for veterans. So that was like the first one they unpicked. But basically they started to unpick bits and pieces from this freeze. Then I think saw that job was going to be so huge. They have now, in the words of the new press secretary, they've rescinded the OMB memo, but not the original executive order.
Because a judge weighed in, right?
Yes. First, a judge froze it, and then they walked back this memo. In the meantime, however, there were a lot of people saying this is maybe not an accident. Donald Trump's advisors, have been talking about wanting to challenge this Nixon era rule, the Impoundment Act or whatever, that limits the president's authority to mess around with spending, right? That limits the president's authority to get in the way of spending funds that Congress has authorized. And so there were people who were saying, this isn't just the act of administration staffed by people who could have been using the last couple of months to prepare and target specific programs, but I guess didn't, and thought they would just whack everything with a giant hammer and are now being proved fucking idiots. Instead, they're cannily setting up a court challenge of this Impoundment Act. Doesn't seem like they are ready for that challenge right now, considering they walked this thing back. But Ted, I think we kind of saw this the last time. I'm a little surprised they're not more competent this time. I really think that the acting OMB director, or whoever, put this together and launched this idea, I really think they did not know the impact it would have. And
I think I'm going to, pure speculation, I have no reason, nothing to back this up. But this to me has the fingerprints of Elon Musk all over it. It's a standard, budget cutting kind of approach, especially in Silicon Valley, sort of, vulgar capitalist, shut everything down, fire everyone. Let's not forget that memo that Musk apparently authored to about 2.3 million federal employees, offering them a buyout if they quit by February 6th. They'll be paid through September. And basically, it's like, if you don't have to take this, but if you don't take it, your department may not exist anymore. You might be downsized. You might be transferred to an at-will employee, thus making it easier. Or if you return to work, your return to office might now be in a different state. Sorry. Mm-hmm. So There's and that's sort of an approach, right? You burn everything down, and then in a certain type of corporate head, and then you bring back things back online as you need them, instead of doing it the other way around and culling the herd. I mean, Musk fired 80% of Twitter this way, using the same subject line in that email. I mean, this reeks of Elon Musk, or at least his influence.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. But with Twitter, it doesn't matter, because ultimately, who gives a fuck if Twitter disappears tomorrow?
Makes no
like
difference.
some people in the industry's livelihoods depend on it, of course. So, sorry, you would be out of the job. But that's a much smaller deal than literally everything that is funded by the federal government. And again,
the economy would collapse. I mean,
it's it's stupid. And so I am glad that so far, because I just had been saying, hey, wait for this to settle out. Again, I don't like this administration, but I don't think there is somebody in the White House rubbing his hands together and cackling at ending cancer research or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, they don't actually want to do
everything
that,
that the government,
and they don't want that heat. Yeah.
These people don't really understand everything the government does. That's what's really going on here.
And I mean, maybe it's also good that, right? It wasn't the fear was a competent Trump 2.0. Not demonstrating that just yet. So I, would feel like anybody who's in panic about this funding, just wait. It'll be held up in court for a long time. Probably. They don't seem like they're trying to fast track a challenge to this impoundment thing right now. And I think also Donald Trump doesn't want to be the president who ended cancer research. You know what I mean? Like, I think he himself, again, bad guy, but not a cartoonishly bad figure across the board.
Right.
And he doesn't want this fucking heat. He doesn't want to be the guy who let down veterans. He doesn't want to be the guy who stopped, who set America back a decade. So yeah, it just looks like incompetence again. And it does seem like if you wanted to do this, you could have tasked people from November to January with looking at all of these programs and these coming publications and whatever else. And you could have had a few in mind to stop immediately and then done this review.
Politically, I mean, this is a lost opportunity for Democrats, and obviously it's good for the country, but it didn't last long enough, I think, to do Trump any harm. He's been saved from himself, and that's we'll see if there's more of that coming.
Yeah. And then we have Guantanamo. Who's going to Guantanamo, Ted?
So up to 36,000 migrants, including men, women, and children, apparently. 30,000 beds have been already ordered to be prepared, plus with the option of converting a golf course to allow for 6,000 more. And so these people are, they're starting with people who are currently awaiting charges in jail for crimes, but they haven't been convicted of anything or even stood trial in many cases. In other cases, they're people who have been convicted. They'd be transferred out to Guantanamo with no end in sight. There's been some speculation that this was a move to sort of coerce the home governments whose citizens are being held to accept them. But Trump sort of belied that. He said, no, actually, there's many countries like Guatemala that are willing to take their nationals back, but we don't trust them to hold on to them. They might get out and come back to the US, so we're going to send them to Guantanamo instead. This is, by the way, a very expensive, plan. Yeah. A story just broke yesterday about how a recent military flight to Guatemala of deported migrants cost almost $4,900 per passenger, which, in other words, they could have all been flown cheaper by first class on commercial aviation. This is I know that Trump's not exactly a deficit hawk, but this is kind of ridiculous. And the optics of Guantanamo are, this was chosen by the Bush administration as a place that was ostensibly outside of the reach of American constitutional law, including the Bill of Rights, habeas corpus, and so on. It's bullshit. The Hamdi decision said that Guantanamo torture victims, detainees, whatever you want to call them, unlawful combatants, they all have a right to habeas corpus rights and other standard rights that we all have just for being on U.S. territory.
Mm-hmm.
But that's been ignored by Obama, Trump, and Biden, and I presume Trump again now. Nobody's paying attention to it. And so these people will not have access to immigration lawyers. They won't have they'll be out of sight, out of mind. No one's going to care. Journalists aren't going to cover it. Journalists aren't going to have much access, if any. That's what this is about. And it's absolutely, I think, meant to be a threat in other ways. I mean, this is a concentration camp. I mean, it's the legal definition the dictionary definition of a concentration camp. And I think we should, the lack of organized democratic, hashtag resistance to any of this, that there's, I have been calm about, and I've not succumbed to TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, up until now. But Democrats have said that they're in wait and see mode. Let's see what Trump does before we freak out. Okay, this is a freak out moment, in my opinion, or it ought to be. Yeah.
I almost wonder if this is supposed to be, if this is sort of another gruesome attempt at deterrence. Because I feel like even the prospect, what is the deterrence now? You're going to be rounded up by ICE and thrown out. You're going to die in the desert because we're dumping out water. The people leave you there, whatever. But all of those things, in a perverse way, they feel more manageable than getting out of Guantanamo Bay. I wonder if there's an element of deterrence theater to this plan as well.
And to try to encourage self-deportation.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, because I would rather take my chances crossing the desert than possibly end up in Guantanamo Bay indefinitely.
Me too.
Yeah. You mentioned airlines. We have a guest I want to speak to in a second about DeepSeek, but I guess we should probably mention that just last night there was. So they're calling it the worst air disaster in the United States since 2013. Mm-hmm. And then I had to look up what happened in 2013, and it looks like a UPS plane crashed. But yeah, a commercial flight coming in to land at National Airport, DCA, landing, coming down low altitude over the Potomac, collided with a military helicopter. Nobody appears to have survived from either crash. They're in the midst of
67 lost.
Yeah, 64 on the plane, 3 on the helicopter. From what we hear now, the helicopter was doing a routine training flight. It doesn't look like the plane did anything wrong. Unclear whether there was a miscommunication at the tower. I mean, we have audio, right? Of the tower communicating to the helicopter and communicating to the plane. It's far too early, I think, to assign blame. But I think, for the past 2 years, we have been talking about the increase in near misses at American airports on the ground and in the air. And this can't be taken out of that context, right?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think there's a systemic issue. I mean, I don't know. It could end up that it was the American Airlines pilot who was responsible, but I doubt it. I think they're going to assign the blame to the deceased military training crew for sure. And that may not be mistaken, but there's a systemic issue here, which is there is not a holistic approach to air traffic control. And many of the conflicts that we've seen between commercial aviation, some disasters have either been possibly ascribed to, or certainly ascribed to, interactions with think about that US Navy plane that shot down the Iranian jetliner back in the 1980s or 90s. There was also Korean Airlines fought also in the 80s, shot down by a Soviet military jet. There's Pierre Salinger alleged that TWA Flight 800 that out of JFK in the early 2000s was shot down accidentally by a U.S. naval vessel that was conducting training exercise with live fire in New York Harbor. I mean, the point is that we know that, from that recording that you mentioned, Michelle, that there's that there was, without a doubt, there's air traffic control at DCA, which is Reagan National, did communicate with both the military and the civilian craft at the same time. But that's a handoff that often happens really at the last minute or two before there's that intersection. It's not like they're all governed together. And you have to think about a space like Washington, where there's so much government and military activity in the skies. You have to start thinking maybe we need to do more to separate these the military infrastructure from the civilian. Maybe they need different flight paths. Maybe we need to keep them apart more. Maybe we need better communications between military ATC and commercial ATC. I mean, it's starting to happen a little too often.
Yeah. And we need more. Again, this is not to say that this is the fault of any air traffic control in this instance.
Doesn't sound like it.
No, but workers at airports across the board, from the baggage handling staff, the ground crew, air traffic control, have been complaining about long hours and burnout. They are understaffed. Yeah.
And this all goes back to Reagan and the PATCO, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Union, who were fired by Reagan. And yeah, I mean, there's been, a lot of them are complaining about outdated equipment. It's not good.
No, and it's not acceptable. All right. No. Shall we talk about DeepSeek?
Yes.
That was very fun for someone who is an AI skeptic and kind of an AI hater. It was pretty fun. So DeepSeek is a Chinese AI company, and last weekend they dropped a new reasoning model. I guess there are large language models, there are reasoning models, but it released this reasoning model that it is claimed can rival those of OpenAI and other American companies, but it was made at a far lower price. Far lower. Far lower.
$6 million is what I read.
Yeah.
But I know people who live in houses that don't cost that much.
Exactly.
That cost more, sorry.
There are, of course, naysayers, but the effect of that was to rock U.S. tech stocks, and in particular, chip maker NVIDIA, which lost, as we mentioned at the top of the show, like 17% of its value when it, at least indicates now that you don't necessarily need NVIDIA's absolutely best chips to make a product that can rival the products of the guys who do. But we're going to talk about what actually happened.
Elon Musk says that he doesn't believe that. He thinks that somehow they got some of those fancy chips on the DL.
And then there's also these allegations that DeepSeek was sucking up data from OpenAI's models to use. We're going to ask somebody who knows better than we do. We're joined by Chris Garaffa. They're a technologist and the co-host of the CovertAction Bulletin podcast. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Great to be with you.
Can you just start off with like what did happen over the weekend? Like, what is the thing that DeepSeek dropped?
Yeah, they released R1, really a brand new model, and that follows up on the DeepSeek version 3 that they released back in December that didn't really get a whole lot of attention. Both of these models, in terms of what they're able to do, I'd say they are rivals to OpenAI's model, to ChatGPT, to Facebook's and Google's, respective offerings. But as you were saying in the introduction, they apparently trained this much, much cheaper than it costs a company like OpenAI or Facebook or Google, who will spend billions of dollars in terms of equipment and energy costs, where this was just, if we are to believe the reports, and I don't see any reason why not, and I think we can get into that, a few $1 million. Still a lot, certainly, but not nearly the investment in terms of equipment and energy that have been put into some of the American-led models.
Well, yeah. Talk first, like, is this smoke and mirrors in your opinion, or does this seem to be the real deal, right? And I mean, yeah, there's like a whole angle of the story about American export controls that block China from being able to buy the highest level of NVIDIA chip. This was apparently made with some of these lower level chips, but there are people saying, oh, but it probably has stuff that squeaked past export controls anyway. I don't know how much that matters. But I guess my sort of fundamental question is this a fake or is this the real deal? Is it a sort of clever copy of American companies, whatever generative AIs, or is it a real thing?
I don't see any reason to doubt it so far, based on having tried it out, having used it, having installed it on my phone and checked it out, compared its answers to ChatGPT, to X's Grok, and to others. I don't think it's the technology itself, in terms of the answers it gives you, not a giant leap or bound above them. But again, it was a process that they used to get to it. So in terms of the export controls, apparently what they did, they used what's called the N800 card from NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA has a much more powerful card called the N100 that China cannot get, and has now an even more powerful card called, I believe it's the B200. So, and these things cost tens of thousands of dollars each, and they use tens of thousands of them to train these models. This is just, imagine the kind of energy, the kind of heat that's generated from this, really ridiculous stuff. And the newer the card, the more powerful the card, likely the more heat it's going to generate, the more power it's going to use. That's the American way, isn't it? Bigger and better. But DeepSeek was able to use these slightly less powerful, but still pretty powerful, H800 cards, which they were able to import before the export controls under President Biden went into effect, saying that China is not allowed to import cards of a certain type with certain manufacturing processes that make the chips smaller and more efficient, meaning that they can do these kinds of things. What DeepSeek apparently did, though, was in addition to using the H800, they optimized their entire training system so that they could do this with less money, less time, and less power. So they didn't just take the American way of more power, more money, more energy usage. They said, okay, we're going to figure out what we can do with what we've got and how we can make the process better without just saying we need more power. And so they optimized a number of the steps in the pipeline for training these AI systems. And by doing that, they were able to do it for so much less money, in apparently less time, and with these less powerful chips. So you can't send the H800s now to China. You certainly can't send the H100s or the B200s out to China now. They have been caught up in the export controls.
Is there any way to get them through, Chris? I mean, it's like, so, I mean, does Musk have a point? Musk is just calling bullshit. He's like saying, basically, I don't believe it. It's not physically possible what they're claiming. Is it possible that, these chips made their way into China? They fell off a truck somehow?
I believe that they got into the new chips. No, I don't believe that they have the number of chips and the number of cards that they would need to do this would certainly be noticeable. You need hundreds, thousands or tens of thousands of these cards, all parallel in line to train some of these models, especially with the sizes that we're talking about. So no, I don't think that Elon Musk really knows what he's talking about in this case. He should show some proof if he's gotten me.
I have a question about the freak out about this at the, not at the stock market level, but at the sort of pundit level, the commentator level, talking about the arms race between the United States and China when it comes to AI and AI production. Because on one hand, I've been told for the last several years that AI is extremely good. We need it for the benefit of humanity. It's not dangerous, really, so we don't have to really have a big conversation about regulating it or anything in the United States. But what we should do is throw hundreds of millions and billions of dollars at these companies like OpenAI and Microsoft, et cetera, give them preferential access to government land, let Microsoft restart 3 Mile Island for its energy demands. All of that is super duper fine because we need AI. It's going to be good for all of us, except if China makes it, and then we're in an arms race and it's very dangerous. And that, to me, it doesn't make sense, right? So yeah, I just sort of wonder, if AI is so good and not dangerous, why exactly is it important that China not be able to create it?
That's the whole big question, right? So is AI good? Is it bad? I mean, it really depends on whose hands it's in. But
Yeah.
I don't think that OpenAI are the good guys here. I'm not saying that I think, DeepSeek are necessarily also the good guys, but
Full
I don't think OpenAI.
transparency, I'm like blacklisted by OpenAI. If you ask OpenAI who is Ted Rall, there is no way to get them to admit that I exist. And that was not the case a year ago. A year ago, I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal criticizing them. And then I was unpersoned from OpenAI. They're not the good guys.
Right.
Yeah.
And for a company that claims to be so open, I mean, it's in the name, but it's really in name only, right?
Right.
And I
I
think,
tried to reach out to them. They won't get back to me.
they don't get back to you. So listen, it's really who controls the technology. It's like any AI, like any technology, not necessarily good nor bad. It's what is it used for, who controls it. And right now, it's primarily in the hands of the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Sam Altmans and all of these multi-billionaires who are using it to and as a result destroying the planet with the way that they're training these models, but also not being
And
responsible with the output.
not to mention raping all sorts of copyrighted material from people who never gave any of their consent to it.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And it's funny, I know that Sam Altman is claiming and some others are claiming that OpenAI's work was stolen by DeepSeek, which is it's ironic of OpenAI to even say that. They went and stole all of our stuff, everything on the internet. They scraped everything, whether it's, your posts on Twitter or Reddit or Facebook, your art on a website, whatever it is,
trillions of dollars of intellectual property.
They went and stole all of it. And then they claim that DeepSeek stole their work. I mean, first of all, look, technology and science are built on the shoulders of what has come before. So it's not stealing necessarily. It's in the tradition of science.
And even if it were stealing,
come before.
Who's going to care? Who's going to feel sorry for them?
Right, exactly. So these guys who say, "Oh, we're so open," we're open AI, or we've got this, XAI Foundation, or whatever it is. They're really trying to fool us, and we shouldn't fall for it. To say that they're somehow the victims here, just because it's a Chinese company, and that's what it all comes down to.
OpenAI was supposed to. They pretended to be a nonprofit for a while.
And, right.
Yeah. I want to ask before I get into a long story about monopolization. But I also think the energy demand question is really interesting because as we've said, like for the last year, we have seen article after article asking, can the American energy grid actually supply the needs of these companies when they're developing these large language models and other AI? Well, yes, should it is the question we should be asking. But the question has really been, can it? How much money would it take? How much should we let consumers suffer when, Microsoft and OpenAI and whoever are sucking up all the energy in the grid? Now it seems like maybe that's not necessary at all. And it doesn't make these guys actually look very good that they're, in the White House pushing for, to be able to take more and more American energy. There's an interesting story in ProPublica, I think, about Washington State, which used to have an energy surplus that it could sell until a data center moved in. And now it's in the position of having to either allow consumers to suffer or violate its own green energy laws by starting to burn coal again. And now it just looks like these guys haven't even tried,
That is the effect here, right? It's been compared to a Sputnik moment, not our old radio network, but the satellite from 1957, I think. But it's like it's as if the Russians in 1957 had been able to fire this thing up into the sky using like a paper airplane. It's like they did it on the cheap. I mean, and it does, and it makes me wonder. The place I go to is, maybe the need, the so-called desire to generate all this extra energy to fuel AI. Maybe that's really more about just trying to expand the fossil fuels industry and big energy than it is about trying to fulfill the need, quote unquote, for AI.
Interesting.
Well, when you've got this seemingly unlimited and we know it is very limited, but the seemingly unlimited source of energy in fossil fuels, because you only are looking month to month or quarter to quarter whenever your profit reports are due, then it doesn't matter. You don't need to be concerned with what's this going to do to the environment? Can we spend 3 months developing a new system that makes this faster? Where, China, they certainly are focused on development, but they do take the environment into consideration. And I think that's one of the things, in addition to the export controls that they certainly knew were coming, and the geopolitical situation that they took into consideration when they were building DeepSeek, when this company was setting it up. So, yeah, I mean, OpenAI doesn't have to worry about, 3 quarters from now. They'll worry about that 3 quarters from now. They're not worried if the trees are still growing.
And now the whole idea of peak oil, we know that's bullshit. There's hundreds of years of oil still in the ground, unfortunately. I wish peak oil were real.
They will go, to any end to dig up Anwar or whatever it is to destroy the environment to get to
under the Arctic now that it's all melting away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the economic relationship between the US government and the tech industry. And I want to ask you guys to indulge me a little bit because this morning I came across a piece by Matt Stoller who was writing about the consolidation of the fire and emergency vehicle industry ahead of the LA fires. And I want to connect a couple of things in that industry, the railway industry, the tech industry, the music industry, the health industry, and ask about the effects of monopolization. So to sort of give you the little synopsis of this Stoller piece, before the 2010s, you had a bunch of companies that were making fire and emergency vehicles and making parts for them and repairing them. And then after the financial crisis, one company called American Industrial Partners began rolling up the whole industry. And after 2010 to now, consolidated it to the point that the company that it evolved into takes in about a third of the revenue and owns about half of the market. In that period of time, prices for different kinds of fire trucks have gone from $300,000 to $900,000 for different types to $1 to $3 million. And the time from order to delivery has gone from less than a year to between 2 and 4.5 years. Right. And so what has happened in, I think, these words by Stoller is that a handful of financiers have been allowed to transform a critical, once vibrant industry into a rent extracting racket. And that is one of the reasons why when LA was hit with the worst fires in its history, more than half of the city's fire trucks were out of service. We saw this in the railway industry during the pandemic, when in the last 40 years, we've gone from having dozens of major rail companies to now 5 or 6 that could not respond, got all bottlenecked up during the pandemic. We also see in East Palestine, this huge derailment there. And that has been detailed in, among other places, the American Prospect, which has this great story about how deregulation of railways in 1980 brought us decades of consolidation and this hyper focus on efficiency under absolutely normal conditions. So if nothing changes, you can run these faster, longer trains and you can fire a bunch of your staff. You can make people endure some shitty service on trains. You can eliminate any spare capacity and you can make more money as long as nothing goes wrong. And when there aren't any other players in the game, you don't actually have to perform railroading very well anymore. In 2019, freight railroading was the most profitable industry in the country, right? But it's not good, And so this is what happens. Trains are expensive. They're not always reliable. They suck. US railroads suck. Workers complain about being overworked and pushed to cut corners. But boy, do they make money. We look at United Healthcare, which has become this behemoth that has been buying up private practices. I think we know what's happened in the healthcare industry. Prices have just gone up. Outcomes have gone down. You look at the music industry, right? Where vertical consolidation, if you're an artist and you're a manager and the guy who, the company that makes your albums and the company that owns venues and the company that sells tickets are all owned by the same people, you're in a position to be stuck doing whatever they want, which is what will make money, which is not necessarily good music, right? And so that brings me to what I thought was an interesting piece in DropSite the other day that said basically what this exposes is the broken social contract between the US government and Silicon Valley, which was to let a handful of tech bros, in their words, become unfathomably wealthy. And in exchange, they'll build a tech industry that keeps America globally dominant. And the US government kept up its end by ignoring, again, monopolization of this tech industry. And companies gobbled up competitors and dominated markets and made tons of money. And along the way, they stopped doing anything really innovative, well, to keep us on top in terms of innovation, and instead started playing like spreadsheet Jenga to create enormous valuations and suck up more money and more investment. And now they've gotten pantsed. And it seems like this is not so different from what's happened in the emergency vehicle industry or in the railway industry or the music industry or whatever.
I was thinking
it's just
about
that
farming
now
when you
it's
mentioned
like
that. The combines, like the racket that they've set up to soak the farmers with proprietary software every time they have to be updated, and it's part, and it has a ripple effect because it's making farmers go bankrupt.
Yeah,
right.
And it
if
seems
you
like
can't repair your own tractor, right? John Deere is notoriously guilty of this.
Yes.
And why are eggs $1 each? Partly because of that.
I mean, it seems like the thread here is monopolization.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is getting a ton of attention here is that a bunch of high profile billionaires got really embarrassed, right? And a sort of like a flagship of American identity and industry has been shown to be hollow. When in most of these other instances, it's like, oh, I guess some more people in LA had their houses burned down. Bummer. Or Amtrak sucks, public transportation sucks, everything is slow. There's, you know what I mean? Like the consequences are worse in these other industries, but they're not as high profile. And so I wondered,
and this one has a market reaction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I know, Chris, you think a lot about political economies and the relationship between government and industry. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, right? Like, because I thought that DropSite piece was good and saying, hey man, we let you guys become really, really rich, and you told us you were the best, and this is fucking embarrassing.
Well, I think there's a couple things I'm thinking about here, Michelle, because I think it's a really interesting point. First of all, they also agreed to build them a surveillance infrastructure to match and beat anything else ever developed in the world, including China's so-called surveillance infrastructure, which, I mean, the way the US surveillance system works just blows London's, anyone's out of the water. So look at how much, Palantir, for example, or Oracle are involved in the new administration, but the promises that they've also been getting under the previous administration. At the same time, I think, the US lost China on 5G. We can't forget that. Yeah. China, for decades, was treated as the manufacturing plant for Western goods. And in a pretty racist way, actually, the West said, China's never going to learn how to do these things better. We're just going to have them make our goods. But China put resources into science, into technology, and they all of a sudden, they were able to make 5G equipment. And then the US said, this is bad. 5G is good, but this is bad. We can't have Chinese 5G equipment. Mm-hmm. They should be buying ours after they make ours. We can't buy theirs after they make it. And they had it was under the first Trump administration, the clean network idea, right? Mm-hmm. Where we had to get rid of all the Chinese equipment. You're not allowed to buy Chinese cars now, all of these things in the US. And so they create these monopolies do come up and they exist. And some of them are natural monopolies and some of them are forced monopolies in the tech industry. And they often just get stagnant because, again, it's that what is going to make us more money rather than what is actually going to be an interesting thing. I mean, Ted, you said it earlier, the question that they should be asking is, should we be doing this? Should we be destroying the world to train, a new large language model? Not can we destroy the world?
It just seems like we have these incredible disruptive technologies. And, look, it's a capitalist country. We don't have a planned economy, unfortunately, in my view. But I mean, you have this, like, there was the drone swarms over New Jersey that had, we still don't really know exactly what was going on there. And that was a reminder, like, well, drones just sort of happen and people just started selling them, but we never had any kind of national debate, discussion, congressional hearings, to talk about, well, is this something we want to do at all? And if we do want to do it, how do we want to do it? And what kind of regulations, if any, should we have? Do we need to keep? I mean, it's the Wild West, and it is kind of insane, even from the standpoint of free market capitalism. It's kind of insane. It's like this stuff is going to bump up against a lot of other moneyed interests.
Yeah, they absolutely are, right? And even without a planned economy, you could have a system that just takes into consideration what are the implications of this? What are the possible bad uses of this, rather than reacting to it, planning ahead and inviting experts in, inviting people who will be affected by new technologies in, and saying, hey, what do you see going right and wrong? What should we watch out for? But that's not what happens. It's like this tragic this crash in DC this morning with the plane and the helicopter, this awful crash. They're going to go in, and now apparently Trump is just blaming the FAA and diversity, right? But they're going to go in, there'll be a hearing afterwards. But what will I almost guarantee what we'll find out is that there was some safety thing that wasn't taken into consideration ahead of time. This is one of the busiest, air travel areas in the country, certainly on the East Coast. We're going to find out later that there was, something that could have been done if only somebody had been asked. We see this time and time again. Train workers, to go back to that example, Michelle, train workers were saying, listen, in ideal conditions, we can manage this, but we shouldn't have to. We should have better working conditions. We need more repairs done on these trains so that when the conditions are bad, we can still survive them. Yeah. But no one listens until there's a disaster and it's too late. So what is
it's in every sector. I mean, about 15 years ago, an Air France plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean on its way from Rio to Paris. It was pilot error. It was a sensor that had gone wrong. The pilot was asleep, not in the cabin. The co-pilot was flying the plane by himself on autopilot when the emergency began. And this whole thing and the thing is, I was really thinking about that a couple of weeks ago. I saw a photo of the inside of a commercial passenger jet cockpit from the 1960s, like one of those like Boeing Constellations, right? And there were 7 people in the cockpit then, and any one of them could fly the plane. And over the years, there's like a navigator and all these, and over the years, they've eliminated them one by one to the point where now you have one person in the flying the plane, one person, that person has a heart attack or whatever, 350 people are going to die. And it's just, I mean, it's just, we don't allow room for error, like if I live in New York, if I need to go somewhere by subway that under ideal conditions should take half an hour, I leave 45 minutes ahead of time if I want to be sure I'm on time, and I still might be late. You need wiggle room.
Well, this is in nursing, I think it's called like just in time, or hospitals, it's like just in time inventory systems.
Not just
in
hospitals.
Railways, it's
everything.
Precision railroading systems. Yeah, all of this is, again, streamline everything down so that it's very efficient under absolutely ideal circumstances. And it doesn't really matter if it immediately falls apart when anything else happens, because you own the industry anyway and you've made your money. And this comes back to like, again, I am not sort of issuing some kind of blanket statement about the good old days or whatever. But in all of these cases, we are talking about a deterioration of an industry from one that was working, making fire trucks, running railroads, making technology, to a monopolized behemoth that primarily makes money and secondarily does a thing. And runs a train on a track.
And makes money by imperiling public safety.
And it's almost as though the OpenAI going from nonprofit to profit, it's like too pat. It's too perfect a metaphor of like, oh, I see. You guys were a technology company and now you are a money-making thing, like every other industry.
It's worth asking, for example, in the case of the fire trucks, right? I mean, if something's that essential to public safety, should it be private at all? I mean, shouldn't this be a government enterprise that is, there's a government company that makes fire trucks and doesn't care about profits?
Yeah, but pretty soon you're going to say that about healthcare, Ted.
Yes, just maybe.
And at the same time, can we ask, okay, so something that can be as dangerous as AI in so many ways, should that be in private hands? Or should there be public control over something that impacts all of our lives at this point?
Well, and let's not forget, I mean, blink and you miss it. I mean, I'm not a fan of these tech bros, but they all came together about a year ago and asked the federal government to regulate them and said, please, Elon Musk was one of them. Please regulate AI. We're worried about it. And if you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 tech company, you need to be you need that, because otherwise your competitor, you might decide, okay, I'm not going to go at a breakneck speed. But if your competitor doesn't care, then it's off to the races with them, and then you're going to go out of business. They want to be regulated. The government refuses to regulate them.
Yeah, and it was so interesting to watch that, because they also wanted to make sure that they were involved in writing their own regulations.
Well,
it was just when, same thing when, remember that summer when Mark Zuckerberg and, Sundar Pichai and all of the social media people were being called in front of Congress, kind of day after day, week after week. And they all said, oh yeah, we are so willing to be regulated. Let us help write the regulations. Well, of course they want to write their own regulations. I can write a list of rules that I'll follow, no problem. But that doesn't help the people that are going to be impacted by my behavior, right?
I want to ask a sort of, I don't know, like philosophical question, I guess, in this case. Just sort of like, what is AI to the people who are making it, to like the government that, the sort of outgoing Biden administration and incoming Trump administration have both made big announcements about their great support for AI, whatever. But like, is it actually a technology that is going to improve the world in a variety of different ways that is important? Or is it just like an economic lifeboat? You know what I mean? Or something like well, we gotta send this money in some particular direction and we'll send it there now. Does this sort of question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think it's important to look at the fact that AI has been an idea in development since the 50s, actually. It was, I think, 1956 when, the idea of AI was really first codified even. And then, of course, there were minor developments throughout, the next 30 years, and then obviously the significant developments that we've seen in the last decade or so. I think there's a lot of really good uses for AI. I think it can be used for good. But that's not necessarily what it's being used for. It's being used to create deep fakes. It's being used to, create these images and videos and audio recordings to scam people out of money, to make them believe that they're really talking to some famous celebrity, and then they have to send them Apple gift cards, like scamming them out of everything, right? We're seeing that. We're seeing, the election related, impacts of AI and the bad, the image generation, the video generation. We're seeing, the hallucinations of these systems, or them just giving bad information. What was it? It was something about like, you can eat wheat paste or something like that. Put wheat paste in your macaroni or something like that, and it'll taste better. Yeah.
I mean, well, the thing is, I do think AI, as we thought about it in science fiction, is not what this is. This is not, the idea either from a dystopian standpoint or a utopian standpoint was that AI, it could become Skynet, but it was going to be a machine that taught itself, and it would become smarter and it would learn the way that we learn. But I don't think that AI, as we have seen it here in like open language models, I don't think that's that. I think this is not that. It's not learning really, in the sense, like in the same way that a human being learns, that a human brain learns. It's more like it's just it's scraping up information and it's synthesizing it and it's crossing it over. I don't think, in a way, the name's wrong.
Well, artificial certainly is correct.
Yes.
The artificial part is correct.
Right.
No, the whole idea is to get to this, autonomous system, the, general intelligence, right? That's what they really are trying to get to. They keep saying it's 5 years away, it's 5 years away, it's 5 years away. They've been saying that for, 50 years.
Like
They
Iran's
were saying that
bomb.
back in the 70s, but that's not here yet. I think what's been done and what we've seen done with these, LLMs is impressive. I think it is impressive. I think it has helped some people. Certainly, it's helped some people get rich, but it's also helped people, who may have trouble writing to generate, a response, a form letter or a cover letter to, to apply for a job. Good. There are some things that I think it can be used, for good, but the dangers at this point are really outweighing the good. The risks that we are facing from AI are outweighing the positive benefits that I think most of us associate with AI. And just like, these tragic train or plane accidents, we're not going to pay attention to it until it's too late. That's the significant problem that I'm seeing right now. Yeah. Whether it's environmental destruction, social chaos, or something else, we're not paying attention enough to the possible disasters that AI can bring us.
We are
instead, we're just fighting China.
It seems to me like a lot of this technology is developed, prioritizing convenience over all else, and not really considering the downside security risks, right? I mean, I think about like the Iranian nuclear scientists who, they had a you can dial into work system, right? And then and then someone dialed in to their work, right? Stuxnet, the Israeli-U.S. virus. And I was always like, well, why, if you had such an important, high priority intelligence top secret program, would you just say you have to go to the office to use the computer? It made and run the centrifuges. It made no sense.
Yes, Chris, there's so many. Go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just going to say, I don't want to keep you too long. I had one dumb question. Not dumb, actually. To back to like, what is this supposed to do? I remember we talked to you about this like a year ago. Remember the orb? Remember the it was an OpenAI thing, right? It was a Sam Altman project. They were going around the world scanning people's retinas. And I guess the story was it was all for a kind of cryptocurrency that could be more secure because it would have your like bio data or something. And like cryptocurrencies are simply whatever, unregistered securities, whatever. They're sort of poorly defined, but they just seem to be a way to, again, like a weird scam. And so again, you're like, well, what is this? Is the orb dropped? Are we not doing the orb anymore? Like, this was just another way to try and make money.
Yeah, there was a WorldCoin. It was what they called it. And I mean, there was, as of a few months ago, I haven't really seen much about it because Spain is saying it's like not allowed in Spain. There have been fines against it. I think there was criminal investigations in, I think, Kenya. And just like country by country, they're kind of like blocking it or looking into it, trying to say like, all right, this is not something we want in our country. But like, look, I mean, remember NFTs, when NFTs were all the rage for those like 8 months and people spent so much money and time?
What?
But that to me like reveals the state of these people, right? Like this is, this is just this is just going to be like a kind of pump and dump scam and on some level, right? Expanded it, right? Like that is mostly what cryptocurrency is. So you have supposedly the best and the brightest working on something like cryptocurrency, I think should make us view with skepticism any of their projects, especially that when they say, in order for us to continue making this wonderful project for you, what we're going to need is government investment, government land, and half of the money, half of the energy the grid creates. But don't worry, you're going to get it back.
Well, listen, we had some of the best and the brightest working on the Manhattan Project too. So that's the reality. What could they have been working on instead of that? When we want to tap the best and the brightest, we want to tap, the potential that exists out there. That's when we go back to it, that's why we have to have the conversations. Is this not just, is this something we can do, but is this something we should do? And
Yeah.
what
Is that
should we
fundamentally
do?
un-American? I mean, I think it's an important question to ask.
I think it's fundamentally anti-capitalist. And then people can decide for themselves if that's un-American.
Chris, I don't want to take too much of your time. I really appreciate you joining us. It's really nice to talk to you again.
I'm really happy to be on. Congrats on the new show. Love
Thanks,
keeping up
Chris.
with it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Chris Garaffa. See you again
Great.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye, Chris.
Ted, I didn't want to keep Chris too long, but I wanted to ask you, there has been a lot of as you say, it's the Sputnik moment, comparisons to our Sputnik moment. What did we do after Sputnik? Created NASA,
Right.
and with a bunch of Nazi scientists, made our space program. And,
Right.
we did NASA was cool, I guess. Working with a bunch of Nazis, not so great. But I don't know if it is another Sputnik moment. I don't know that we have we don't live in the same country, right?
No.
Right now, the response to our Sputnik moment is not going to be a government agency that is tasked with doing things in the interest of the American people after some kind of discussion. At least it was a matter of, political speeches and stuff. Now it is going to be the same people who have already dropped the ball, it seems like. Because we got, NASA's basically being run by SpaceX now, or if it's not being outsourced to Russia at
At the Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan.
Exactly. So yeah, it's just going to be, I guess, throw a bunch more money at these already incredibly wealthy men and let them, do whatever they want with it, and then tell us it's for our own good. It's sort of, we're not even in a position to respond that way anymore.
No, we're not. And I think that's the thing. We can't, your point is so well taken. I mean, we can't rise to this moment because we're not configured to think of acting collectively as a people, which is something that happens under the government in order to get big things done. Interestingly, I don't think that, I still think that there are certain endeavors that only government has the money and the organizational ability to do. I mean, I'm skeptical that SpaceX can go to Mars. I don't know that they're rich enough and that they have enough resources, to send a manned mission to Mars. A round trip manned mission, let's say.
Just wait till they cut all this federal spending, and Elon Musk can just redirect it all to his private companies to do so.
That's what I'm very skeptical that they're going to be able to get away with all that. I mean, the infrastructure of federal spending is so protected, and there's so many. It's so entangled in private industry and everything else. I just don't think, I'd be very surprised if they can slash and burn the way they want. I hope they can't. I think it'll be a disaster.
I agree. I think that they will be able to do some bad things, but I think
sure.
always with the Trump administration, just wait a sec for the dust to settle, because he has a history of attempting to do things that he can't do.
That's true.
So just hold on, wait for a minute, and then fight the battles that actually are there to be fought, but not all of the ones that you're going to tire yourself out and then 2 days later they're irrelevant.
Yeah, it's like you have to pick and choose. Many years ago in the 80s, I was on my way back from work, and I was assaulted by about 12 young people who just basically all came at me at the same time. And, the first reaction is, I don't know what to do. I'm being swarmed. There's this one and that one and this one and that one. Then my brain said, pick one and beat him up. So I did that. And then while they were beating me up, and then I picked another one, and then no one wanted to be number 3. And then they left. That's what you have to do if you're, whether you're a leftist or other opponent of the regime, or let's say you're a Democrat who still has some cojones left, which I don't know if there are any. Bernie Sanders voted for Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
But, you have to pick, like you said, Michelle, you got to pick the important ones, ignore the other ones. You have to do triage.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Ted. Got anything else for us? Think we're good?
I think this was good. Yeah.
Yeah, I was very interested in that DeepSeek conversation and
Oh,
the
me
sort
too.
of economic picture that exists.
Chris is great.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's been deprogramming for the day. We'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye, Michelle.